Uh, so I'm going to do a soft intro, then we get started. What's really going on, everybody? You may have not heard from me in a minute because we are on summer break. As you know, I'm Henry Woods. This is What's Really Going On podcast. Make sure you are following us, subscribe, liking, sharing, doing all that great stuff. YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts. We are at WRGO Pod on Instagram and Twitter. So make sure you check out those handles. Today we have a really, really special guest, someone who's actually doing the groundwork that we like to highlight. Zuri, you can kind of give us an introduction of yourself and then we'll get into your organization.
Okay, sure. Appreciate you having me on. Again, I'm Zuri Mabry. I'm the founder of Gentrispot Incorporated, a 501c3, and I'm sure that we'll get into that a little later, but I'm happy to be on.
Right. So for those who might not know what a 501c3 is, that's just like nonprofit organization, typically doing the work for the service of the people, but you kind of make the organization under that umbrella so that you can qualify for grants and things of that nature, correct?
Correct. Yep.
All right. So what about Gentrispot? Like, what is that for our viewers that may not be familiar?
Yeah, so Gentrispot is a nonprofit where we raise awareness for the negative and positive effects of gentrification and what gentrification has on a city's ecosystem and the quality of life in a city. As we all know, gentrification has become such a buzzword, but my nonprofit really brings awareness to both sides.
Mm-hmm.
We rarely see those positive sides because social media and other news outlets are bringing awareness and bringing news to individuals who have, one, been displaced, or two, who are not benefiting from gentrification. Mm-hmm. And with that latter statement, my 501c3 mission is to bring awareness, but also bring forth focus groups and solution-oriented data-backed solutions where to mitigate displacement and to make sure that if you grew up in your neighborhood and development moves in and gentrification moves in, we make sure that those residents are not forced to move out and not benefit from those benefits.
I so super love that for so many reasons. I did like a project somewhere in college about gentrification that was happening in DC because for me, the DC that I knew is totally no more. And then when some of my, fellow alum and professors or whatever would come to campus, they're like, this is totally different than what I experienced. So to your point, I think gentrification does have positives and negatives, but because of the media and you said a good word, buzzwords that are surrounded around or associated, that's a better way of putting it, with gentrification, it's seemed to be negative. But I think us as Black people, if we know how to partake in that, we can benefit from it. And seemingly Gentrispot is kind of serving as that bridge, correct?
Yes, we are that bridge. And you brought up a really good point. You have to know how to benefit from something that is seen as an invisible line. And I like to say that gentrification is like an invisible line that people don't see that's around their neighborhoods from the beginning. When development moves in, when developers are planning out these 10-year, 20-year plans to bring in new development. Unfortunately, Black people, we don't know that we can have that information for ourselves. We don't know where to go to receive that information. So Gentrispot, we're serving as that conduit to bridge that gap between that knowledge of, one, to answer the question, well, where do I go to get the information so I can benefit from? And if I receive that information and I still cannot benefit from gentrification moving in my neighborhood, the second question should be, okay, now where can I go to receive that knowledge and receive that help? And our next step with Gentrispot is to create those solutions, to create where individuals can come and we partner with these developers, and we partner and become consultants with these builders and developers to make sure that these residents are taken care of and not just pushed to the side, and that they are able to benefit from gentrification and experience those positive effects of
Mhm.
gentrification in their own neighborhood. And like you talked about, when you went back home that one time, when you go back home and you see that your neighborhood where you became who you are, where you went from a boy to a man, from a girl to a woman, it's like a part of your soul is gone because those memories that you have are now gone. It's all about psychology. And now Gentrispot, we want to bridge that gap in so many ways, in so many avenues to make sure that, you know, you benefit from gentrification in your own neighborhood.
That's that like 100% where I want to kind of direct, because I think we've kind of spoke of some positives, but like being that you're more informed than I, would you be able to kind of highlight some of those positives or ways that we can maybe get involved or take advantage of the development? I want to kind of change the tone of the conversation a little bit. The development that's happening in, let's say, the Fourth Ward of Atlanta or 14th Street in DC, or some of our listeners are up in New York and they've experienced it way more than anybody, I feel like, you know. So how would, you know, an average Black person who maybe has some type of education and a decent income maybe get involved in this? Because I'm living in Uncle Todd's old house and attempting to keep it up as much as I can.
Yeah. So one, to answer that question, that's a good question. Everyone is already involved in new developments and gentrification that moves into their neighborhood. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the good but sad part about it. You're involved without even asking to
Or
be
no.
involved. Now, the second step to that is to know you're involved. And then the next question is, now where do I go, or who do I connect with or collaborate with to make sure that I'm not selling my grandma's house, you know, to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that I am making sure that that we're not in food deserts, that fresh markets and fresh food are moving into my neighborhood. And
Uh-huh.
it's not only fast food in a 1 mile radius, right, by
Mm-hmm.
foot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Another question you can ask yourself is, you know, who is in this realm and in this industry already, whether that's working in urban development for your 9 to 5 or a passion project on the side.
Mm-hmm.
People are involved and you have to speak up and ask those questions. So I would say, to wrap up this answer, one, you're already involved. The second question, the second answer would be, who can you collaborate with to see what is in your bandwidth and what you can do. It's all about what's in your bandwidth and where your knowledge is, but always be around people who are smarter than you. Like, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And being smarter than you could be just being smarter in that industry of someone who, you know,
Mm-hmm.
might see it or read about it more than you do, but you can bring your expertise and you can bring your experience of living in a neighborhood. So many people don't understand we're so involved in politics without even asking, that we know more than what we think, right? You ask
100%.
your you ask your friend or your loved ones opinions on their neighborhood. They have opinions. That's knowledge, right? You don't have to crack open a book and read word for word what's going on in your neighborhood all the time. You can
Mm-hmm.
recollect what you've experienced, and you can recollect what's not right. You can
Mm-hmm.
recollect what needs to change. That's a conversation. Now, you
Mm-hmm.
next step would be contacting an organization like Gentrispot, like other organizations that are, like you said, on the ground and bringing those solutions together. So that's the little ways to get involved and to take that to the next step for you.
I'm glad you answered like that, because I kind of want to give an example before I pivot to like next question. Because I have a friend who's a homeowner down in the Fourth Ward, actually near the West End in Atlanta. And he isn't too familiar with the like, I'll say, like handling everything. Like compared to the average Joe, he's more informed, but he's not like, he doesn't know everything. But one thing that I admire about him is how you said, like, getting people around you that are smarter or more informed than you are on a specific topic. He's consistently at like the like community meetings. He goes to the city council meetings, and like, I find that commendable because it's like, bro, like we're not that old, but yeah, you are, you are old enough and that old to get involved and learn that language and like figure out, like you said, how to, let's say my neighbor and I have this constituent with the community. We can bring that to the politicians that represent us, and advocate for whatever changes we're wanting to see. And kind of to what you said, we're already inevitably involved before we even realize when the development moves in. And I think for our listeners, if in case you have any tips on how we may become more knowledgeable outside of, preparing ourselves or arming ourselves with more people around us, but like, how do we become more informed about the process before it starts? So let's say, I don't know how to frame it, but because I know these plans, let's say it's Cop City that's coming. That plan has been in place for 5-10 years. You know what I'm saying? So how can maybe the regular person and the politician and the developer work together before we start displacing people, or the people that want to be involved, they kind of figure out too late? I don't know.
For sure. For that first question, I want to, for your listeners, for sure, I feel like not so many people who are listening would be that developer or politician, probably just yet, just assuming your audience. The first step is everybody has a phone, right? There are master plans, as they call them, and CDPs online, where these plans are created for urban development studies and urban development plans. If you live in Atlanta, if you know about Ponce City Market, the Beltline, all of these were master planned, and these plans were available online because most of them require public funding. So most of this information is online, and that answers that question before we segue into this question of, what's that next step? Where do you go? Look online. If you live in the city of Atlanta parameter and you would like to know developments that are coming before it's too late, hey, like go on to City of Atlanta website. You can contact your zoning department, city planning department, site development departments. All these departments are public funded departments that have individuals who work there 9 to 5, who are seeing this information every day and can talk to it because it's public information. It's not private information. So I would say that's that first step. If you want to get involved, if you want to know what's coming, if you want to reap those positive effects of gentrification and you have that cash flow to buy a house, look up the developments of where they're moving, and you'll be able to move right on into that neighborhood. And in 10 plus years, this development is coming and will be knocking on your door.
See, thank you. Thank you for that, Meet. I appreciate that, because as a person who is interested in buying a home in Atlanta, those are things that I'm going to now consider or go look into before I buy my property. Because it's buying black the block, right?
Exactly. And to that other coin of people who might not have that cash flow, right? We have to speak on both, or I like to speak on both of the coins. You might not have that cash flow, but you still want to be involved to make sure that you're not displaced. Again, looking online and contacting organizations like Gentrispot and like change.org. And there's so many that you can look up and contact to see how you can get involved in these focus groups that are, curated. Like we curate focus groups, and we invite developers and builders and seeing what's being built next, and see, different solutions that can be created and curated to make sure that residents have a voice. But when residents have a voice, you have to know when to speak up and how to speak up, and have people around you who can speak that language, to make sure that solutions are in place to not displace those individuals in those neighborhoods. So to speak to that coin too, there are solutions out there.
You just kind of gotta be eager and willing to put yourself out there and speak up. I hear that. And from the kind of what I know and speaking in this conversation, it sounds like I know you're doing a lot of groundwork between like speaking to developers and like mitigating situations to provide solutions for the redevelopment that are happening in our communities. How would you say like Gentrispot started with this process or wanted to get involved? What inspired you to like maybe do this work, because this is change agent work. To our late Congressman John Lewis, that's grounds I stand on. So I really commend the work you're doing. But I'd like to know, and my listeners to know, before we start talking about the event coming up, because I'm pretty sure that's a way that you kind of provided a solution. But like, what has inspired this work for you, or what keeps you inspired to do this work?
For sure. Well, first, God, when you receive a vision from God or whoever you choose to have in your life. When I received a vision, at first it was confusing. It was like, why me? Why does he think that I'll be able to deliver and bring solutions? But when you're obedient and you follow that calling, you start to see that everything you need is within you to make that change. The second is a more
testimony. I love that. I love that. I love that.
The second is a more technical answer. I was a construction engineer for 4 years for a design build firm in Tampa, Florida. And I was physically boots in the ground, boots in the dirt every day, managing multi-million dollar construction projects in neighborhoods where I remember vividly, I was managing a construction project. I was standing physically on the site, and across the street was some abandoned apartment buildings. And I remember the process of seeing those apartments being demolished. And the first thought in my mind was, where did those people have to go? All because I'm managing a multi-million dollar project across the street.
It personal.
I took that personal, because now, even though I'm blessed to have this salary, and I'm blessed to be on this coin of receiving all this knowledge of how to build buildings and bring in development into new neighborhoods, the other side of me is again asking that question: where did those people have to go? Why were they moved out? And then you start to research and you start to understand, and you start to I started to look for organizations or businesses that might have these answers, and I couldn't find them. Right. But I saw it physically with my eyes as my project became successful. Right. But when those projects move in, something has to change for the equity and property taxes to present that return on investment. Right.
Yeah.
When I learned that, I said, something needs to be done. And I kept looking for those organizations, and I got the vision to create Gentrispot Incorporated. And it's in the name, spotting gentrification. If you read it backwards, of spotting that gentrification and bringing solutions to that specific ecosystem to create and to sustain a quality of life as a result of gentrification.
As an entrepreneur, I love that. I love your story. Oh my God, that's a beautiful, that's really inspiring, because I'm glad that it touches home, and it's something that you're genuinely, personally, just passionate about, and you continue to do the work, which is how we kind of got here. Rent is due. We have it coming up, you know what I'm saying? So, do you want to tell our listeners more about that? Maybe how it got started, some of the partnerships, when is it, how do we get there and get tickets and get involved?
Yeah, for sure. So Vail ATL and myself and my organization, Gentrispot Incorporated, is partnering to bring Invisible Lines, Rent is Due, block party, and music showcase. The block party Invisible Lines is September 9th, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Peters Street Station, 333 Peters Street Southwest, Atlanta, Georgia. This event came about by collaborating with a young lady by the name of Mia White with Vail ATL, which is a music production company. And she curates events, and she advocates for indie artists, and basically is finding that new talent. Well, when we collaborated, she was speaking of how the ecosystem in Atlanta, and we collaborated on really giving back to our community. So the block party by Gentrispot, but powered by Vail, Invisible Lines, is bringing awareness to all of the housing disparities and bringing awareness to gentrification in Atlanta and the effects that housing disparities and the effects of gentrification has on the ecosystem of Atlanta and the quality of life, specifically in Atlanta. We have guest speakers from the Atlanta Beltline Partnership, which will be speaking on a legacy retention housing program that is really on the grounds doing, bringing a solution to what we were just speaking about earlier in this conversation of how to keep those legacy, how to retain those legacy residents in their homes as one, the Beltline brings new development. So where do those residents go? So you can come out to the block party and hear about real-time action and real-time solution. We also have another guest speaker, King Williams, who have been reporting, writing books, and advocating, and again, reporting on gentrification for 15 plus years. So we're going to have, as we were speaking of earlier, you know, we're going to be around people who are smarter than us, who have been on the ground working. You see that connection in the area of gentrification reporting and, you know, keeping residents where they are. And then following the block party would be a music showcase from 7 to 10. And before I wrap this up, I want to speak on the name of the block party, Invisible Lines. I named the block party Invisible Lines because there are many invisible lines around our neighborhoods where we grow up, especially as Black children, where we don't understand or we can't even see or even know that there's an invisible line around our neighborhoods that a system has created around us. You might see a system as individuals who had to live in income-based housing, or as we like to say, the projects. And that's just one example that came to my mind, but those are invisible lines, right? Those invisible lines of, you know, knowing when to cross and when not to, and those invisible lines of almost like a glass ceiling. These invisible lines will be talked about, such as gentrification, which is one invisible line, and also going by the name of redlining. That was another invisible line as well. So we have so many invisible lines, but at this block party, we'll be touching on the invisible line of gentrification. So come on out again, September 9th, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. at Peter Street Station.
I was gonna make sure we said that real quick one more time. I'm super, 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 super appreciative of you sharing. Like I gained some knowledge and tips. I'm definitely going to stop by Saturday, September 9th. Definitely going to stop by just to show more support. I'll definitely tell my friends and drop it in the group chats and all that great stuff. Can you tell our listeners where we can follow, maybe support your organization, Gentrispot, even more, or just stay in contact?
Yeah, for sure. Again, my name is Zuri Mabry, Zuri Mabry on all platforms, Instagram. And you can follow Gentrispot, GENTRISPOT on Instagram as well, where you'll be receiving updates going forward.
For sure. Again, us at what's really going on, AWRGO Pod across all platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, all the podcast stuff. Make sure you listen to this episode. We're going to be posting it live on YouTube, so definitely check us out. Yeah, thanks for tuning in with us today, guys.